there's always this pattern, right, with every Game Awards where they
Mm-hmm.
show off what they're like, what they show off, what games they're showing off.
Yep.
Um, Last year it was literally just League of Legends, a bunch of
Mm-hmm.
card game stuff,
Yep.
some boring dumb games, sometimes horror games and stuff like that. This year it was mostly like night stuff and zombie horror survival games.
Fantasy night stuff and zombies.
Yes,
Yep.
exactly.
I I guess they
Even both of them combined with that one with the one movie game thing, the one night character that I saw.
Evil Dead.
Right, yeah.
Evil Dead the game, which looks
That
pretty
was
good.
it looks pretty all the games here looked pretty good, even though some of them looked similar to each other, I guess. Like I can't remember some of the names because they looked so similar to each other, but they looked decent, I
Well,
guess.
you see that I think I brought it up before, where you have Dark Souls, which on the surface looks like just another Western European night fantasy setting, but then you
Mhm.
peek under the surface and you're like, oh, actually, this is like clearly the best ever. And
Mhm.
uh, I guess what I'm saying, you gotta peek under the surface.
Right, yeah.
So like when the game shows you're running DDT, wrestling moves,
I don't even know what's going on.
you go, I understand that I have to now pay $59.99 for this game on release. There,
Yeah.
God, 2021 that game was, right? I'm looking it
I
up.
think so, probably,
I'm
yeah.
looking it up. Please tell me that it's as soon as humanly possible, because I want to running DDT someone in that single player game. This is this is why stuff like Devil May Cry is so sick, because you
You
pick.
just you're just a guy who just simps for action things all the time. That's
I
probably why you like fighting games, right?
I am a shill for being able to do cool stuff in games. So many
Hmm.
games are just like, here, do this thing, and you're like, okay. Like Mario, here, jump over this gap 1,000 trillion times. Okay, right? But then Devil May
Right.
Cry says, what if you wanted to Royal Guard literal universe cutting maneuvers and then use said parry to slap somebody so hard that they die instantly? What if you wanted to take a sword, hit somebody into the air 87,000 times, all with unique movesets? That'd
Hmm.
be pretty cool, I think.
Right. Here's the thing though, right, with that, right?
You have to
Um,
be good to
the
do that.
difference between something like Mario and Devil May Cry is that
Mhm.
Mario is simple and like comfort food, right? Like every time there's a Mario game that comes out or a Mario thing, it's probably going to be something of like good quality or something. Like it's going to be something safe that you can easily just play
Mhm.
and it feels good. Something like Devil May Cry or like any game that tries to do something super different and wacky and crazy, like there's a kind of a risk to that where it's like, yeah, you can do this crazy bullshit
I
thing,
wouldn't
but
even
you
call it
but
like crazy. I just think they tried. Like
right, right.
I think they went a distance of quality that not a lot of games go, because
Mhm.
instead of asking themselves, let's stick to the safe, like let's introduce like what we know and love, let's bring it back. Like they never thought you'd be able to do this move again. Oh, they're
Mhm.
liars. Let's let them do Judgment Cut End, and then everyone loses their mind in the Virgil boss fight. I wasn't necessarily trying to like call out Mario, but one thing I
No,
will
yeah,
say
yeah, yeah,
about
yeah.
Mario,
I was comparing the like different things.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
real quick, what I was going to say though is like you can do all this crazy stuff right in these games, and that you like all that stuff about those kind of games. It's
mm-hmm.
kind of like your bread and butter. But like the reason why there's not many is because you have to execute it like feeling wise, control like or feeling and control wise properly. If not, it's not going to be a good game, and that's why Mario is safe because like even though yeah it's not that crazy it's still safe to it's going to be simple and safe to play because it controls really great,
Well,
but a
yeah, yeah,
game like that
it's a lot easier
it's a risk.
to gameplay test a jump button as
Mhm.
opposed to a melee button, a range button, a jump button, a style button, style switch buttons, DT trigger, weapon
Right.
switch, range weapon switch. But you see, I don't think necessarily that it's overtly complex, because if you wanted to beat Devil May Cry, there's not a lot you have to do. In fact, you can absolutely get away with spamming triangle at certain moments in time and just beat the game that way. I think I like high skill ceilings and low skill floors. So
Hmm.
the entry level is very low. You start the game and you don't have to worry about a whole lot other than not dying and pressing triangle at the right times. But then you continue playing and you're allowed to have a high skill ceiling. What I mean by high skill ceiling, like you're allowed to do these incredibly complex, effective maneuvers in the game, whereas so many games are so scared of letting the player play that they
Hmm.
end up with a low skill ceiling, which is one of the problems I have with something like Smash, where even though Smash is a really good game, I don't think they let the player play. They limit you too much with the system they have at hand, where they stop so much fun that they could have by just like, oh, we're not going to let you do this mechanic, and we're not going to let you do this mechanic, and we're going to make it very visual but not very gameplay taxing. And so you take something, it's entry level, but there's no room to grow. You get good at Smash in a day, but that's it. You've seen all the games has to see. Like, the high level gameplay, the only difference is they can tech a throw, and like that's kind of sad. And I guess I just always prefer a game to trust that the player will want to have fun and let them, as opposed to limit the player in hopes that it will prevent them from getting too wrapped up in mechanics. Because I don't know, I think that's weak.
Yeah, I see. Well, then what do you think of a game like Kirby?
I think a game like Kirby as being, um, I think a game like Kirby doesn't do enough to understand why it's good, because there's definitely a list of good Kirby games, and then there's a list of bad Kirby games, and
Go
almost,
ahead and tell me what you think.
well, I don't have the full definitive list, but like something like
Off the top of your head.
Kirby Superstar Ultra, like that's a
Hmm.
good Kirby game.
Great game. Yeah, good
Yeah,
game. Yeah.
Kirby. What I always forget the name of it. It's the Switch game, the Kirby All Star
Star
Friend,
Allies.
Star
Star
Allies.
Allies.
That's a good game, right? And
Hmm.
it's not inherently that there's a huge amount of growth in terms of like mechanics. The mechanics are the same for many, many games. But there's a huge amount of growth in the gameplay loop of something like a boss fight, where you can learn a boss fight in and out to the point where you can just not get hit once in something like Kirby Star Allies. And
Hmm.
Kirby Star Allies gives you these options of gameplay that not a lot of other Kirby games have. So if you look at some of the mediocre Kirby games or some of the bad Kirby games, you have like uh the Squeak Squad,
Hmm.
where they just don't do anything. It's Kirby original, like Dreamland, where you don't have
Right.
copy abilities that much. There's like four copy abilities, and then you have the animal companions. But then it's like, why would you have the animal companions instead of just more copy abilities? Like you're
Right.
inherently limiting your gameplay. It's just that so many Kirby games, well, so many. It's just that a number of Kirby games managed to fall under what I would describe as tedium as opposed to fun. So something like Kirby Star Allies or Kirby Superstar Ultra, you play it and you have the ability to do these cool things, even by Kirby standards. It's like, oh, look at this, I can get this cool, like, thinking of like Kirby Superstar Ultra, you can get the motorcycle one,
Yeah.
and then if you're playing two player, you can ride on the motorcycle. Like
Right.
that's something small, but that having the option just is just something that you can do if you want. You trust the player that giving them options and not forcing like the tedium or the medium makes a better game. Whereas with so many of the mediocre games or the bad games, it's just like the original Kirby with not a lot unique to it, and then the one unique feature is forced and not very fun comparatively to the good experiences of Kirby, which is a bunch of fun copy abilities. And
So what you're saying is that you really like games that give more accessibility or more gaming like playable options to players.
yeah, options are always going to be something that improve a game. You'll never hinder
No
yourself.
matter. What
I
if the
mean,
options are bad though?
obviously, absolutes are a risky thing to say. Like, obviously, not every option is a good option, but A great example is literal in options. Like if you have a game where you go to the options menu and you can select like gameplay options, it's way better to have an option for subtitles than force subtitles upon you. Because if you just have no options and you have to have subtitles, there's inevitably going to be the one person that goes, well, that's distracting for me. I can hear what they're saying. I don't need the subtitles. And then all the developer can say is, well, we just made it default because we didn't think anybody wanted to do it. And that's where the faltering statements are, because if you remove an option and make a constant, you're inherently having to play psychic with your game, like the people who are going to play your game. Like you're inherently having to guess what they will want best out of your game, which is always usually going to be wrong. You know, there's always someone out there that's going to know your game better than you are, which is really weird, but always true. Like there's a guy who is going to take your game that you've made for the past 8 years and like mod it once and make it way better. It always happens like that. Like someone can look at a game and improve it, and you never know why. And so with adding options as opposed to a constant, you always let players customize their experience to what they find fun. So instead of something like, let me think of an example. Something like the difference between Breath of the Wild gameplay versus Devil May Cry gameplay is in Breath of the Wild, it's very one note. Weapons do this one thing, and you don't have options of stringing together combat moments. Like you have tools available to you, and you can use
But
them.
there's nothing to build on. But there's no building onto those
Yeah,
tools.
there's
I
no
guess is what you're
building onto
saying.
those tools, and it's not even necessarily that I'm asking Breath of the Wild to have a combo setting or a combo type gameplay, but for what Breath of the Wild has, and for combat being a focus of gameplay, it doesn't do a lot to make that gameplay interesting. You learn everything the game has to offer you in terms of gameplay, like combat gameplay, an hour into your 30-hour experience, and I think that's weak, right? You go through
Right,
your
I guess so.
you go through your main sort of trials and unlock all of your like stasis and ice and bomb, and once you get all of those, and the game's like, okay, you got them, you come to the conclusion, oh, that's it, right? You have that moment where it's like, there's not really anything else for me to do outside of, you know, stat boosts, like getting better
I
weapons,
guess
which
so.
are similar to the
But
ones you just used, but are just better in terms of damage output. And it's like,
there
eh.
there are different weapon types though that you eventually get. Like when you're going beyond the game, right?
Mm,
The more you get away farther from like the tutorial place or whatever, you eventually find, or the more you like level up, I guess, or get more divine beasts on your side.
yeah.
There'll be harder enemies or whatever with more powerful weapons
Yeah, where
and
the
even more
enemies
weapon
come
types.
in, yeah.
Yeah. So like developing those weapon types, like I had no idea boomerangs even existed in the game until I actually found a guy with a weapon
Mm-hmm.
that actually had a weapon. And trying that out, like I can easily tell if that was for me or not, obviously, and like I can see what it would be used for.
Mm-hmm.
And things like bows and spears and heavier weapons or whatever that you use as like big clubs
Yeah,
and
with the
stuff like
heavier,
that.
slower move sets.
Right, those obviously have they're also like unique talents and stuff that I can use for different situations and also try them out with the other stuff. Like Breath of the Wild really does best when you're mixing and matching different things together instead of just having one thing being developed the entire like way through, like with Devil May Cry, with all of its weapons, right? Um, and I guess that's probably all I have to say for that. But like, I don't know. I just think that in different combat styles, their Devil May Cry and Breath of the Wild are both different in their own rights,
Oh, they're very different. Oh, they're very different experiences.
right?
Because
But what
one
would you
is
say would? Sorry, go ahead.
because Devil May Cry is combat centric, whereas Breath of the Wild is just has combat.
What would you say would be better though if the developers focused on separate things and having developing those things, or would you
Um,
care if they mixed all the things together to like make it flow better? I guess with
so
everything.
My example for a way to improve Breath of the Wild specifically is one of the issues I had with that game, and actually the reason why I put down the game after playing it for a little bit was the fact that your weapons broke and you had no way to repair them.
Right.
So you might think at a first glance that that's good design because it forces you to experiment with a lot of weapons. But remember what I was saying about how you should give options to the player instead of forcing them upon you?
Hmm.
When you make your weapons incredibly temporary,
Durable.
not necessarily
Yes.
terrible, but temporary, you're implying that they have very little use or meaning outside of the combat. So when you look at combat, you compartmentalize it, where it's instead of thinking of combat about an experience of gameplay, you think of combat as a taking of your materials. Kind of like in survival horror, where you stop looking at enemies like, ooh, a big scary monster, and go, okay, that monster is going to take me 20 bullets. I only have 25, and I know for a fact there's more guys after him, so I'm going to have to run away from this guy. And so you go to the next room and avoid that one guy, and so there's a zombie around the corner, and you're like, thank God I didn't shoot 20 bullets into that monster. And I think I can use Dark Souls as an example, where Dark Souls, you have a bunch of different weapon types. You have straight swords, axes, great swords, ultra great sword, maces, clubs, and all that.
Hmm.
And every weapon that falls into a category behaves very similarly. You have R1, which is light attack, and R2, which is heavy attack. And let's say you get like a straight sword. So you have the short sword and the long sword, which both fall under the straight sword category. If you pressed R1, they would do a very similar animation. However, their R2 attack might be different. For instance, in Dark Souls 2, if I remember correctly, the long sword heavy attack is like a sweep, whereas with the short sword, it's a stab. And even that tiny little unique detail, of which both of those animations unique to them are used for many weapons outside of those two, just that slight difference in each of the uniquely named weapons, even if they're literal basic, like literally just called short sword and long sword, adds difference in each of them that makes them usable and different for their own unique manners. But mostly why I'm comparing it to Breath of the Wild is because in Dark Souls 1, notably, you have weapons with limited lifespans. In fact, in all the Dark Souls games, your weapons have limited lifespans, except Dark Souls makes it a point to where you can repair them. They make it very easy to repair your weapons in Dark Souls 1. And in fact, in the case of Dark Souls 1, it's kind of a non-issue. I don't know why they put in the mechanic, because it almost never comes up that your weapon breaks. Only in Dark Souls 2 and 3 does it really happen, and that's only because they made enemies that specifically break your equipment. But even when your equipment breaks, you just go and get it repaired. It's just unusable until you repair it again. And at this point is where I draw the difference between letting a player have options and then forcing options upon a player and making a medium. Because in Dark Souls, you do have to worry about your equipment breaking. However, if you find that a weapon you use is something you like, you find that it gels best with your gameplay, you can make the conscious option choice to use this weapon, continue to use the weapon, repair it, upgrade it, and then play a game with it through and through. And that was because you were allowed to make that choice. Whereas Breath of the Wild, by making weapons temporary, you're taking the option of gameplay out of the hands of the player to sort of force them to experiment with different weapon types, which definitely is a way to make them experiment with different weapon types. But I think the problem inherently is that if you'd just given them the option to want to experiment with different weapon types, that players who are interested in your video game would naturally do it anyway. So by removing the weapon repair mechanic, you actually end up with a better objective game, because people would naturally want to try and see what all your game has to offer, as opposed to being forced to and inherently making them, value a weapon or all your weapons less.
Right, I understand that. I understand like the fixing weapons thing and everything like that, right? And I understand how like, of course, like because if you wanted to keep the items you wanted, you don't want them to ever like go away or
Yeah, yeah.
like disappear.
Break.
But here's the thing, though, right? Because Breath of the Wild, even though like like the weapons break, you'll basically find the same what you could basically find the same weapon again in the
Mhm.
world. Even if it's like a super rare weapon, you
You
will
can
find it.
reliably find it in a certain location. Yeah.
The only ones that are like the only one of their kind is the Master Sword and the Hylian Shield, which
Hmm.
don't break at all. Pretty
Which don't
sure
break. Yeah.
they found ways around those ones at least. Like the Master Sword recharges whenever it so, quote unquote breaks or whatever. It just runs out of energy technically.
Yeah. You gotta
And
let it
that
recharge.
right. So I feel like it's understandable that it like the stuff breaks because you'll eventually find like something to replace it.
Hmm.
Unless it's armor, because armor doesn't break. It just stays on your
Yeah, armor
body.
doesn't break, which makes. I don't know. I
I feel like that's fine,
The
but
gameplay
whatever.
reason for armor not breaking is because armor costs a lot more materials to make than anything else. Armor takes a lot longer to actually create and upgrade as opposed to something like making food or whatever.
Hmm.
It takes like actual hours of gameplay to get stuff like I forget the exact way you go around getting it, but there's like these star pieces where you literally are just at certain points in the game are standing around on like a hilltop waiting to see a fallen star and
Oh,
then
are we
running
talking
over
about
it.
Breath of the Wild
Yeah, I'm
or?
talking about Breath of the Wild.
Oh yeah, I forgot
When
with the fairies. You're right,
yeah,
but they
it,
don't actually break. They just get upgraded. Is what? Yeah.
well,
Okay.
I'm talking
Never
about
mind.
with the armor pieces. Some of the higher end armors, their final upgrades require fallen stars, and there's a point in the gameplay where you're literally like sitting on a hilltop waiting for stars to fall, which
Right.
is like anti gameplay. You're waiting around doing nothing, like literally doing nothing,
You
waiting
can't.
for gameplay to happen, and that's
Well, there is. You can actually find star pieces in other places as well, not just like
mhm.
randomly from the sky. You can find them in like chests or whatever in different dungeons. Like
This
if
is
you
true.
explore the
Yes,
place, you can eventually find what you're looking for.
this is true, but it yeah, it all goes down to like how willing are you to experience Breath of the Wild in a certain way? Because there's a way you can play Breath of the Wild and where issues of gameplay, quote unquote, whether they're actually issues or not, don't come up. Right? You can play Breath of the Wild, you get all of the divine beasts, and there's a way you can go around doing it where weapon breaking doesn't really matter to you, and armor upgrading isn't a huge issue, and then you can go to the end of the game and feel content. But to do this, you have to follow the like medium the game presents to you, and instead of giving you just the choice to experience the game how you want to experience it and have like that be unique but also like fun, there are options, but they're railroaded by the like issues you have to circumvent if you choose to do so. Um so I had an example, but I forgot the game.
Hmm. Well, there is. Okay, so I feel like Breath of the Wild, what it really does well in though is discovery. I feel like it's more of a discovery kind of game than it is like uh mostly combat issued because
Mhm.
like of course like everyone I think everyone knows a story about like how the game was idealized by Miyamoto and like how he would used to go into the forest or whatever and try to like explore like his
Yeah,
local
the
forests
original
and stuff
Legend of
like that.
Zelda, where like the ideas of exploration came from. Yeah.
Right, and that's I guess that's probably why Breath of the Wild is like that, but
Mm-hmm.
like and it does it really well because like whenever like it's guaranteed you'll probably find see the shooting star land like somewhere in Hyrule before you
Mm-hmm.
ever
At
find like one of the
least
fairies,
once. Yeah,
and
yeah,
you'll
yeah.
be like, wait, what the heck is that? You'll go to it and be like, oh, a star piece. I wonder what that does. And
Mm-hmm.
you'll eventually probably like forget about it, and then like it comes back up again when the fairies come when you meet the fairies, and they'll
Yeah,
be
yeah.
like, oh, the star pieces. So that's what they're used for. You know, it's kind of just like discovery basically. It's discovery the game,
Mm-hmm.
the Discovery Channel the game.
Discovery Channel, the game. The game does a
Yeah.
really good job giving you the idea of adventure and exploration, but
Hmm.
it's tying in exploration with gameplay is difficult because
Hmm.
when reward comes due to exploration, the reward typically you should always strive to make the reward feel like it was worth the effort. So in exploration, you find discovery, and the discovery can be enjoyable. But if the discovery is something like a shrine, then you're inevitably going to go like, okay, I want to go into the shrine and see what's up. And if the shrine ends up being like, oh, okay, like this is a challenge, I'm going to do this shrine and see what that has at the end. And at the end of it is like a weapon, And normally you usually be like, oh, that's cool. But
Yeah.
due to the gameplay loop that Breath of the Wild has, where it has you using these weapons often enough to where they will break inevitably, it ends up making rewards feel less, which inherently devalues discovery, because when you understand that shrines will hold one of three types of rewards: weapons, materials, or currency, it ends up becoming, do I go on this path of discovery to get the lucky draw of one of those three items or weapon upgrade material? Oh, I already said materials. Um, it becomes it all yeah. Tying
Like
that
here's sorry, go ahead.
yeah to just tying that back to the options, um, by just taking away player, you give players a cool option in exploration. You have a gigantic world map that you give them the choice of going to. So much so that you can actually choose to go straight to the final boss without doing anything in the game first, which is a unique choice that not a lot of games allow you to do. Um, with this option, however, of creating an open world map that you can physically access at any point in time, but maybe not theoretically, that you can theoretically access at any point in time, but not necessarily actually access at any point in time, leaves the exploration aspect to follow, the gameplay loop, where you find a new location, clear the area around it, go inside, complete the puzzle, and then come back out. And you will usually follow a very particular path of your choice to do so until you beat the game. And so the gameplay loop moments in between end up becoming the majority of content that you are unique to, because you can enter a shrine and it could be a ball puzzle, of which there are a number of in the game. Whereas outside the shrine, you can find an enemy which you may have never seen before, and that might be more interesting than the ball puzzle you just completed. But then actually fighting the interesting monster ends up being not as interesting as the game wants you to do or think it is, because discovery is more important to the game when combat isn't.
I can understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
This
think
is
that's understandable.
this has now
I
just
do
become my
think
review of Breath of the Wild.
here's the thing. I don't necessarily think the combat is to blame for Breath of the Wild because I mean,
It's not
Legend of Zelda
necessarily
combat,
bad. Yeah, it's not
yeah,
even necessarily bad. It's fine.
I think it might just be the fault of the enemies that you encounter.
It could always be, because you could be unlucky, right? And you can end up fighting like difficult enemy just based on your
It's like a Lionel
route.
or whatever.
Yeah, if you end up fighting a Lionel early on, then you're not having fun, right? Which is where the difference between theoretical like options and actual options come in, because theoretically you can go and fight the final boss as soon as possible, but actually you have to, be good enough to do so. And the actual difference
Right.
between good play and, normal play is that the good player has probably played the game a million hours and understands frame differences, which is where it's like kind of tough to judge, because there's definitely legitimate improvement in learning something like frame data in your game, to where like Breath of the Wild speedrunners will literally just know the exact frames of like an animation that they need to do something to not take damage, or to parry an attack, even because you can parry lasers from Guardians and stuff.
Hmm.
But is that really a better option for like game improvement? Not game improvement, skill improvement. Is that the preferable option for something like skill improvement over maybe making weapons just a little bit more important?
Trying to think.
Because it
I
becomes a very
just-
difficult thing uh, to judge, because there's definitely people like speedrunners, literally, who are able to do some pretty ridiculous things in the game. Like, you've probably seen plenty of clips of Breath of the Wild, like I have, where a guy, hits a boulder in static, flies off of it, glides off of it, lands on top of a guardian, perfect parries all of his lasers, and kills it without even hitting it once. Um,
Hmm.
and that skill came from abusing what the game has as opposed to using what the game gives you, right? Because the game gives you a bomb and it doesn't think that you're going to use the bomb to build up a static meter or glide across the map. When the game gives you the glide, it's not saying here abuse acceleration glitches to like drive halfway across the map. It's saying here when you climb up to a high mountain, you can now glide down safely as opposed to climbing down, which is very boring.
Then what about Melee?
Melee is an interesting decision because it's a genre shift where stuff like frame data, like singular frame differences, are important to the game genre of Melee. And in this instance, stuff like tech is actually. I mean, it's the same in Breath of the Wild. Something like a wave dash in Melee is just as much of an abuse of the mechanics like acceleration glitches in Breath of the Wild. Both
Hmm.
of them improve the game. Both of them are technical aspects of the game, whether legitimate, as in they were developed purposefully, or accidental. They have inherently added more to the game that players can do, and that's something just a good choice of Nintendo is that they didn't necessarily want to take these options out. Going back to Devil May Cry, there was something in Devil May Cry 4 called the Distorted Real Impact, which was there's an uppercut move Dante does, and during it, if you charge it up all the way, you can actually Devil Trigger during it, and it will multiply the damage of the move, and that was not intentional. However, whenever Capcom learned of this, the development team behind Devil May Cry went, that's actually so sick that we're going to put it in the game as a mechanic now. And so update whatever of Devil May Cry 4 Special Edition actually just like put in a visual glitch, or it kept in the visual glitch of the Distorted Real Impact, and they brought it back for Devil May Cry 5 because it was just a unique way of using the mechanic. And in that aspect, it all goes to show you that like the technical actions and options that like really in-depth gameplay give you tend to improve the game as opposed to ruin it, because no one really looked at something like melee wave dashing or something like acceleration glitches in Breath of the Wild, and they went, wow, that ruins the game.
Hmm.
Because I'm sure you could make the statement like it's poor coding. I'm sure you're right. It is absolutely poor coding, but it happens to be that it's poor coding that makes the game more fun. And it makes the game more fun because it gives players more depth. So
Hmm.
options and depth are things that I do very value in games. And I think although it definitely is probably more important to me because of the genres of games that I play more often, I don't think any game would suffer from giving players more options and depth. Like
Hmm.
just an example I thought of one time was in Mario Maker 2. I don't know why they stopped ever adding new stuff into the game. Like
Right.
they should never have stopped putting in new items or
Especially after
enemies.
after a year or two of
Ex-
after development.
Especially because Mario Maker is a game that perfectly you could just put
It
literally
it
everything
runs
into.
it runs on items. It runs on
It
its creation
it
tool, and not
literally
updating that
run
creation tool when it gets old is kind of just like, why did you
exactly.
even create it?
Because for the people who play Mario Maker 2 a lot and they've
Like
played
me,
all
yeah.
these levels, like you who make and play levels, it will eventually get old because the nature of
Mhm.
creation wants you to do more, and if you don't have the options to do more, it becomes very stagnant. Which is
Right.
where I'll point back to something like Breath of the Wild. For the people who speed run that game, they are learning so much about the game, intentional or no, and it creates more depth for the game. But when they found this depth out, what do they think, right? Do they go, wow, that's neat, but like what else, right? They're fueled by this need to want to keep going. But if Breath of the Wild presents you to the scenario that is, no, you've done it, you're right, that's all the game has, and half of that improvement was all from unintentional stuff like glitches or whatnot, it's if I just feel like there was more that could be done. Like with Mario Maker 2, if I can still think of an enemy that you don't have in the game,
Charging Chuck.
yeah, where's Charging Tuck? I'm going to ask the question why. Because Mario Maker is a game that you could absolutely shove every Mario enemy ever designed into,
Right.
and if it ever needs to be that you need to change it because it's the same as another enemy, then okay, right? You know, do what Mario Odyssey did, where they took a bunch of classic enemies and gave them a new mechanic. Because
Yeah, like Frying Pan Bros or whatever.
yeah, exactly. Frying Pan Bros, they are unique to themselves. They're a Hammer Brother, but not. They do a different thing now, and you can never ever come to the excuse that Mario Maker 2 should just like stop getting items because why? Why? That game, you should absolutely put options into that game. And, you know, that's a platformer, which is very far away from the game examples I was giving beforehand. And it all goes down to options and depth of gameplay.
Like what I was able to make like about maybe over 80 levels or whatever
Yeah.
in the game itself with the tools I had,
Which is
which
impressive.
is good.
Yeah,
Which is
that's
impressive, yeah.
That's impressive.
But like if I could get to 100, I feel like that's like the
Mhm.
I feel like that's the best it could ever be.
Yeah.
At that point.
If you can think the statement of, wow, this game's cool and I don't even know all the stuff in it, then that's always a good feeling. Like
yeah.
I
I remember the day when
Mhm.
when people discovered, I don't know if it's technically a glitch, but when in Breath of the Wild they discovered there's the mine carts in the Death Volcano thing, and if you
Yep.
use the magnesis while you're on them, you could ride them like an actual like spacecraft or whatever.
Yeah, you can use
And
that mechanic in that
sick.
way. That was sick, right? And you look at that mechanic and you go, how eye-opening, right? Like that's cool. And it makes you want to see more. And I think it's good game design to put that inherently in a game as opposed to accidentally in a game. So like
Right.
you were definitely right when you said I simp for Devil May Cry character action games, because they just think so much about how much you should be able to do that they end up putting way like so much into the game that just one character can do. So in a game like Devil May Cry 5, which in 5 days, well, actually the special edition's already out, there's 4 characters in Devil May Cry 5, and even just one character, if you played the training mode for them and saw all of their moves, like you would just physically see each of the moves, but you wouldn't know that you could chain a certain number of them together, or that you could abuse like frames to continue one of them for a certain amount of time. Like there's just so much depth in one character that it makes you inherently want more. And I think that's showing good design. Options and depth. Options and
What?
depth. High
But
skill
where did
ceiling and low skill floors.
Right, but here's the thing, right? Because um it's leaving you wanting more, right? So what if the game gets to a point where you're continuously wanting more, but then it stops because it has to?
That
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 when how do you end that, you know?
that's when hope meets reality, I guess. Something, it's unfortunate, right? Because you always want more. That's I made that statement with the idea that it's just like human nature to want more. You see something cool in a game and you want to do more cool stuff, and that's true. But you always have to come to the reality that like they can't put everything in a video game. But it I can definitely tell when I'm watching something like gameplay, when I see like in-depth combat between something that's not in-depth. I can tell the difference because the way that it handles itself, showing you more and then more, is sometimes excuse me, not sometimes, is usually always evident of them having that depth. Whereas something like, have you ever heard of the game? Oh God, I don't remember what it's called.
Here's another thing though we should bring up because You mentioned we were mentioning beforehand, at the beginning of this conversation about controls. Like, it's good if you have multiple things, but if they control well, that's like here because I think the reason why you like it so much is because like games like Devil May Cry where they give you so many options is such a rarity
Yep.
because games that do that have need to control those options very well,
Mhm.
which
Yes, you the control
and
is omnipotent. They're the first and
yes,
foremost important thing of any game is the control, always
and
and
I
forever.
think you can agree with me when I say that Omicron does it very poorly.
See, Omicron is an instance where one man dreamed too hard. Where David
Let's not.
Cage,
Oh, hold on. Let's not talk about the man real quick. Let's talk
yeah,
about the gameplay.
let's talk about the
Where it's a
gameplay.
fighting game of a
Hmm.
fighting game,
It is a
a
fighting
stealth
game,
game,
a stealth
and
game, of open world action adventure, an open world RPG game, and a first person shooter all in one.
right, and it does all of those badly.
And the problem it came to was that instead of refining any of them to be good controlling, it just wanted to have any of them. So it let itself with bad controls. And
Right,
and that
exactly.
ruined it. That ruined all of it. So,
That's why it's such a what's it like? What's the term? Like a cruel mistress.
yes, it's a
That's the
it
kind of thing you want is a cruel
mhm,
mistress, where it's like you can get a bunch of stuff, but if
yes.
they can control poorly, then it's just
Mhm.
like, well,
The problem,
great.
yeah, the problem with having more depth is you need to make sure that that depth isn't like hindering your game, because there's definitely, I won't lie when I say that depth isn't always a good thing. Something like Skyrim, which is very often called like best game ever, so many people love that game for good reason, but those people aren't remembering the actual full experience of Skyrim, because a lot of Skyrim is this unnecessary depth. So much of it is walking around an overworld to get to the interesting parts of the game. And there are parts, definitely in like the Legendary Edition, where DLC adds interesting stuff that happens on that overworld. But if so much of it is going to a little cave to fight three enemies and then that's it, the three enemies fighting time was kind of fun. But was it actually worth the 20 minutes it took to get there from the
No.
nearest teleport?
That's kind of why I've dropped
Usually not.
Skyrim because it's just like I've done absolutely
Mhm,
nothing from getting to place, right?
mhm,
And I see any reward coming up for me doing all that stuff.
And yeah, I have also dropped Skyrim a number of times for that exact same reason. The exact same reason that I also dropped Breath of the
Death
Wild.
Stranding. Oh.
Breath of the Wild, because what brought me to Skyrim for as long as it did is I had to look past the walking, right? That's what every game hopes to do, is that
Hmm.
if there's any problem, it wants to mitigate it by giving you things that are good. So Skyrim particularly, what did make it good for me and why I played it for as long as I did, this one particular run I did of it, was because I liked the smithing. I don't know why, but the smithing skill interested me because not a lot of
Yep.
games have a smithing skill. There was an entire stat dedicated to smithing. You can get it to 99. And I wanted to do that because the prospect of creating the best armor in the game yourself intrigued me. So now, the part where you go to a cave to get a bunch of random items you already have a million of became good because they mitigated the unfun of it, because you would go home and shove it in a furnace and then turn that into XP for smithing, and then you'd be like, sick, I leveled up. And that's where XP becomes a useful mechanic, because it's like now you have a number to follow as opposed to like 20 minutes of your lifetime being lost walking across an overworld. And that's where that game works. Whereas in Breath of the Wild, I wanted to see what the game had to offer me. So I played it, and I fought a boss. I ran across that rock golem boss, and
Hmm.
I actually fought him early on, and I beat him. And I was like, that was actually kind of sick, right?
Right.
And I thought to myself, I wonder what else there is like this. And the answer is not as much, as I got lucky that one time.
Right. I think Breath of the Wild really relies on running across things while you're on your adventure to keep
Yes,
you entertained.
to keep you
Um,
entertained, because
because there's this one right when you get off the thing, right? You're told what to do and go to Kakariko Village where the Twin Peaks are. So when you
mhm,
start heading over there, you will definitely come across the bridge in the game where the one guy or the one
yes,
quirky guy in the game. honestly, that did actually keep me entertained until I actually got to the stable I was trying to get to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that also kept me entertained. Like I think the like what Breath of the Wild really does well is like keeping you entertained for the entire story if you're trying to go on the path of the main missions.
Yes.
And then you eventually diverge into the other like exploration and side quests and all that stuff. I think it does that very well, but for people who don't care about the main story right that like that and just want
Mm-hmm.
to do their own stuff,
I want to
it
play
doesn't do that
the
very
video
well.
game. Yeah, that's where it falters, and that's where I inevitably fall off because what the game has to offer you is a method of which a story is told, right?
Right.
The game has to offer you a very clean linear path to go to each of the main dungeons, fight the main boss, and then see a cutscene, and that part of it's good. But that's not what I particularly value in a game personally, subjectively.
Right.
Objectively, the game's fine. Objectively, the game's an easy 8 out of 10, right? I rack on the game a lot, but that's just because what I wanted from the game was some kind of gameplay loop that would keep me entertained throughout. And
Hmm.
so when I got to combat, I was really looking for something that would keep me interested. So I started pressing square and I got a basic combo and I realized there's not anything else to this combo, is there? And I was like, all right, okay, what other things are there? And it's like, there's a bunch of weapon types. You have a long sword, right? At one point, I got a two-handed greatsword, and
Hmm.
I got hype because I love greatswords. I love two-handed weapons. They're sick. I love those sick, cool long swords that you do cool big slam attacks with. And I kept playing for a little bit after that because I just wanted to see what the gameplay is like. And the bow gameplay was kind of neat. But
Bow gameplay is really good.
the problem you might run into very early on, and what I ran into, is that you run out of ammo because
Yep.
without knowing where to go to get ammo, you are gonna run out of arrows a lot, and so that mitigates you to going like, okay, I gotta use this one shot I have on this explosive barrel so I can kill the Magoblin up top. Magoblin, what are they called?
Goblins.
Magoblins. It's K. I thought it was anyway. But
Yeah.
yeah, and then so inevitably I would shoot the one arrow I had to kill one Macablin, and that would lead the other three to come attack me. And I'd be fairly entertained by the combat that ensued, but not enough to warrant the resources I spent in the battle. It takes
Hmm.
me 30 minutes to get 3 arrows, and I spend them in a 5-minute period.
Hmm.
You definitely can do better than that, though. Like,
Right.
if I had known where to get arrows, I would have had like 50. And so I would have gone and spent 2, and then I wouldn't feel miffed. But when you begin the game and you don't follow the path the game kind of wants you to go, which is very tough to convey in an open world setting that's literally a square map,
Hmm.
you end up with an experience that's below average, what the game wants you to experience, the fun the game has to offer you. Uh, and although they give you options, the fact that you can physically walk across a big open world is an option and in-depth thing. It's depth that isn't mitigated by good design. Always it's good designed. It is a well designed in-depth world, but maybe not as well designed as it could be.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I here's the thing though, right? With Breath of the Wild, I do think that Breath of the Wild definitely suffers from like getting you to where you want to go into interesting places, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there. So, for an example, I wanted to try to hunt down all the shrines because I thought that the shrines were really cool, and I thought getting all 120 of them wouldn't be that bad, and it'd actually be pretty fun,
Mm-hmm.
gameplay wise.
Yes.
And there was this one shrine that I had no idea where it was until I realized it was under me, and I was like, "It's under me. How do I get down there?"
Yes.
So then I realized that there was like I followed like a path, well, not path, but like I followed the mountain I was on and found a ginormous like hole or whatever, and I found a huge cave that was blocked off by a bunch of ice. And by melting the ice with my fire arrows, I was able to get through. And I
Yes.
found this beautiful like landscaped cave with a bunch of like ice pockets or whatever, like you could see the sun from, and like it was so cool. I never would have found this place if I didn't hunt for these shrines.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really cool like experience discovering all that. But you'll never even find that if you're going on the main quest,
Yes.
which I feel and I feel like you also never find that if you're just exploring, which kind of that's what I think Breath of the Wild kind of suffers from as well, is finding all that interesting stuff
They
when
should
you're just
probably
trying to explore everything.
which, yeah, you could. this is something about Breath of the Wild that some people find good and some people don't. It is a subjective quality, so you can't really judge it objectively. You can try and
Right.
judge it objectively, but it's hard to. And that's the quality of, with so many shrines in the game, how many of them are that memorable, right? Like,
Right.
cuz
There are some that are memorable. Like I
mhm.
remember there was one that I was so confused on, but it
Yes.
was like there's a star constellation that I had to do and put the right balls in the right place.
Yes.
There's also an electric one. There's some the shrines I remember, some I don't. But there's 120 of them, so.
Yeah, and the problem with a lot of games, many games, even games that I like, even Dark Souls at certain points fall under, is that they mistake more for better. So
Quantity over quality.
you could absolutely make the argument that Breath of the Wild might have been a better game if you had halved the size of the map and then halved the number of shrines and focused more on the experience a shrine has rather than the fact that, wow, there's 120 shrines. You
Mhm.
can make that argument. It's not necessarily objective, right? You can think that, but it's a subjective. It's an opinion, piece. Some people like the fact that there's 120 shrines and think that that's an objective quality that improves the fact that there are that many, is because with having such a high number, it is an inherently unique experience just by value. But then, some other people, which I wouldn't say me all the time, but there are definitely
Mhm.
examples that support the idea where you should have less but more memorable
Right.
stuff.
A question. How far are you in Breath of the Wild? Like, how far did you get?
How far I went before I stopped? I think I got the glider and I glided off the tower. You get the glider on, and I went to the edge of the main plateau you start on,
Mhm.
and I stopped there. And then my sister was like, Breath of the Wild looks cool, and I was like, here you go, you can have it.
Ah, man, that is quite a shame because the story definitely, if you follow the story path, I had a way better experience. Like it kept me way more invested into the game with the story. Like with whenever I followed what the game told me to do, I understand like what you were saying about like letting the players do that, but I would want to follow the game because I feel like the people who designed the game know better than what the players are doing. I
Mhm.
guess is what I'm trying to say.
They
But
would they know better maybe about pacing, but the experience of fun is subjective to a player, which is
right.
where options come to be like very important, because if a player finds Breath of the Wild very fun, but if the means of which Breath of the Wild is played or given isn't fun, then they will not like the experience.
Right. I feel like even after the plateau, the tutorial is still kind of continuing a
Mm-hmm.
little bit because the game even tells you go to Kakariko Village and like you can learn a bunch more stuff there. And essentially when you're going on the path to Kakariko Village, it's the game still teaching you things to do. And which I feel like is kind of a good way to like let the player experience exploring the world on their own, like teaching them that kind of thing while also
Yes.
introducing the other mechanics like the Korok seats, which gives you more inventory space and stuff like that. And like the stables, they have shops and stuff, and all the characters you can meet, and the travelers, and like and the shrines, of course, as well that you
Yes.
meet along the way, and the characters, and the even like the new enemies like the guardians and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, stuff and yeah, and how water works, like a bunch of different stuff that they teach you along the way to Kakariko Village. Because I think the reason why is because or why I think this is because Kakariko Village is kind of secluded in an area that you can't normally get to. There's only like one way to get into Kakariko Village because it's so hidden.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think normally you could ever get into Kakariko Village, like if you were just exploring on your own,
Yeah.
which
Not
is
not
kind
without
of
exploiting some game mechanic.
yeah. So that's why I still kind of think it's more of a tutorial that way because like because there's no is in a tutorial you don't really leave a tutorial and
Mm-hmm.
you can't really go back into a tutorial. That's kind of like the same kind of mentality I think the Kakariko Village has because
Yeah, the same
even in
design
Kakariko
mentality.
Village. Right. Yeah, and even in Kakariko Village, it teaches you about the fairies and stuff like that. So it's still teaching you things. But after you pass Kakariko Village and like uh Impa sends you on your journey or whatever and tells you all the like the context or whatever that you're doing this for, that's when I think you have the freedom to do whatever you want. Because even though she recommends going to a different village and meeting this person, she
Mm-hmm.
also recommends trying to get the divine beasts and stuff. So it's like a broad range of like tasks you can do on her list but like you're basically like do whatever you want. Just make sure you go save Zelda at the end of the day.
Yeah,
So
like you're physically done with the tutorial at that point, and so that you
right,
can go in an actual large number of directions.
right, and I think where my journey was led first was I don't remember going to the one village that she recommended first. I think I defeated one of the divine beasts first, and that was the Zora one with the fish people,
Mm-hmm.
whatever,
Yeah.
because that was the closest near the Kakariko village, which I feel like was intentional
Yeah.
because the Zoras are everywhere in that area, and they're like, "Hey, Link, you're a Hylian, right?" Or like they don't know it's Link or
Yeah.
whatever, but they're
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
"You're a Hylian, right? Can you come to Zora and village and like help us?" And like you'll find multiple like Zorians, or I don't know what they're called.
I think
You'll
Zorians.
find
Yeah.
Zorian people there telling you, "Hey, you're a Hylian. Can you come help us? We are in trouble." No other like village member, like none of the
No,
Gorons
the
or like the
Gorons or
Greedo,
the
yeah, Grudo
birds.
and the
The
Gerudo tribe, none of them will
birds.
ever say anything like that, like except the Zora, because they are in
Mm-hmm.
trouble and they're looking for a Hylian to help them because they think that it's going to be the hero Link.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, that's when you're introduced to the divine beasts and how you defeat those, right? So that obviously means that you have the other divine beasts to go to, and that kind of incentivizes you to go do those ones because the first divine beast was so fun,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
There was more
that's
gameplay to be had with the story as well.
right. So I think if you got off the when you got if you eventually got off the plateau and eventually finished Kakariko Village, and even all that, like getting to Kakariko and doing stuff in Kakariko is still fun because the game's still kind of not forcing you to do it. It's just kind of
Mm-hmm.
telling you, hey, you can do this stuff, and you're like, okay, oh, cool, I'll go check that out real quick, because and then it eventually leaves you along the path to where I was mentioning before. So
Mm-hmm.
I
I,
think yeah,
I
go ahead.
definitely didn't stop at a location where I knew everything about the game. I stopped at a moment where I got tired of the game, and I if I were see if I was doing like a game review, I wouldn't have stopped there. But I was just playing it to see what the hype was about. I wanted to see
Right.
what Breath of the Wild had to offer, and so I knew objectively the game was great. I mean, we're talking about a first-party Nintendo Legend of Zelda open world adventure game. There's no way it is objectively bad. So, with that in mind, I wanted to see if it would be subjectively good to me. And I didn't give it enough time to sit for an incredible analysis, but I got enough understanding of the gameplay loops presented with normal combat that I felt content. Uh, had I known like where the tutorial actually ends, where at Kakariko Village as opposed to off the plateau, I might have continued at that moment in time. And
Hmm.
had I known, that divine beasts were a better method of going around rather than exploration, which is what most open world games get you to think, uh, I might have continued to that point too. But I still don't know if I would have continued the game through to the finish, but I would have a
Hmm.
better understanding of the game. Uh, I feel like if I were to redesign Breath of the Wild, I would definitely leave maybe the intro to be much more linear, to
Hmm.
make the intro linear, like very linear, to include Kakariko Village. Maybe you leave the
Right.
plateau by like literally going down a slide into Kakariko Village.
Or like
Um,
a gust of wind that will kind of lead you there in that direction.
that will lead you. It may be a gust of wind that brings you along this kind of visual trip where you're looking at a bunch of the overworld map, but then it
Hmm.
will lead you to Kakariko Village, and then you get to a very stable end point. Because with the intro of the game, you get a intro cutscene, and then you open up to what is essentially a cutscene to do gameplay, and then you do the basic tutorial missions for the old man, King Hylian.
Hmm.
And the game doesn't do the best job convincing you of its quality at that point. It gives you like the basics as opposed to like a good showcasing of what the fun like extents of the game can be. Uh, so I think it would have benefited from a much more linear start, but then a better designed,
Expand.
yeah, a better designed expansion.
Right. I get that view. But here's the thing though, because I feel like if what about people who don't want the linearity? Like people
Mhm.
like you ended at a point where you were at the plateau, right? And
Mhm.
like if it was a linear experience from then, people would kind of been turned off from the game because they were felt like they were being controlled to do something that they want don't like that they want to do more than just what the game's telling them to do, right? Like I
Mhm.
feel like like even in the Great Plateau, there was some stuff that you can explore and do, like
Yeah. And
like
I'm yeah. I mean I don't necessarily mean cut out all of the explanation of the plateau, but the game incidentally hinders itself by giving you the plateau and then making like a majority of it sightseeing, but not
mm,
actual gameplay, which I think is a thing you'd want to circumvent. I think starting open world has its benefits, but if you can't give your game a good showcase before you let a person loose,
mhm,
um, you end up not letting the player fully understand a minimum of what your game has to offer, which can be good and bad. There are some people who look at that and go, "Oh, that's very mysterious. I can't wait to discover what the game has to offer." But then there's someone like me who I attempted to see what the game had to offer gameplay wise, and I got gameplay, but not all of it. And
mhm.
I was given the impression that I got a fair amount of the gameplay, and so I was left kind of in a worse position because as opposed to thinking that like, oh, I have another tutorial area up ahead, I should go and complete that before I stop playing the game. It might get better after that. I would have no way of knowing if that were true. So I was given what I thought and what was impressed upon me to be the ending of the intro of the game, the
Mhm.
the metaphorical intro to the game. And so the gameplay I was shown up until that point, the idea that that would be continued for a large percentage of my experience, um, it did not it did not give me a good idea of what the game is.
Mhm.
It gave me a
I can
bad
understand that.
idea. Yeah.
I'm definitely in the kind of category that you mentioned where I want to see where everything the game has to offer, is not just the combat, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yes.
Because great example, when the opening shot or whatever, Breath of the Wild, where it shows you Death Mountain and like a
Yes.
bunch of other places, like
You
that
get
gives you a
outside of
general
the
scope. It
cave, and
could be
that.
it might be overwhelming or whatever, but like then it's like, all right, here's the entire map, like be
Mm-hmm.
amazed by this view or whatever, right? And the main goal of the mission of the like Hyrule Castle in the middle.
Yeah.
But then it's like, all right, let's take a step back, and it focuses on the old man, and like that's the thing is like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
now try focusing on the old man, and then go from there and see what you can find and stuff. And then that way people aren't overwhelmed. They're like, all right, let's check out this thing first, you know.
Yes.
But
Yes.
and then
The.
another thing in the game is when I was exploring the plateau, and then or like I got off the plateau, I think at one point, and then for some reason I heard like caws or like bird caws at one point,
Mm-hmm.
and I look over like to see where the bird caws were, and there was this giant freaking bird like UFO in the sky, which was one of the divine beasts, and like
Mm-hmm.
sick, that looks awesome, I should go over there next. And I think that was
Yep.
maybe at the point where it was like the Zoras were telling me to go to this place, and I was like, but I want to go to the bird thing.
Mm-hmm.
Fine, and I'll go to the thing. And then I was like, oh, if this divine beast was cool, and that big giant like bird thing must be cool. And there's another divine beast as well. I
Mm-hmm.
think there's all the other divine beasts other than the Zora one, you can actually see from mostly anywhere in the map, which I think honestly the best thing about what games do is when they have the one focal point of the game be seen
Establishing
from
shots.
everywhere. Yeah,
Yeah.
be
Establishing.
everywhere
Yeah.
in the entire game.
Mm-hmm.
Like in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, the world tree, you can see it from basically everywhere unless you're inside something,
In
right?
Shadow of the Colossus, the main hub is visible from everywhere you go, and
Right.
you can see the giants you have to fight very early on before you get close enough to actually initiate the fight with them.
Right, like that does the same thing in Breath of the Wild, where you can see
Mm-hmm.
the chameleon crawling across the volcano. You can see the bird flying in the sky. You can see the
Yep.
giant storm and see some bits of the camel inside. Like seeing in the Gerudo Desert the ginormous storm, and then being able to see this giant like creature like walking around in that storm is freaking amazing because it's just like, geez, I have to fight that thing later on. That's gonna be
Yes.
freaking. That's gonna be freaking holy crap.
It gives a good
You know,
impression. The presentation of the game is top notch. The
it's
presentation is
yes,
handled very well. Um, I found problems with what laid after the presentation.
right.
Personally, objectively, good things awaited past the presentation too.
Right.
But I just didn't get the chance to see it, and even knowing now what is past that presentation, I'm content. You know, it's a game that I could have or could not have played.
Hmm.
Um,
Have you seen more gameplay on it?
I have. I still haven't seen like a full Let's Play, but I have seen a fair number of reviews and a decent start of a Let's Play.
I definitely recommend seeing an entire Let's Play because like watching someone go like experiencing the game with someone is pretty cool as well. I think
Mm-hmm.
getting a first-hand experience of the game is awesome. Like there were so many moments like I wish you would be able to see in the game because like so obviously I got the game before my brother did, right?
Yep.
And whenever I was looking at my brother's like gameplay of it, I was like huh, how did he like what's I wonder where that is in the map or whatever. Like
Yeah.
I didn't even know where he was in the point of the game when I was looking at it, which I feel like is good game design because it's just like, well, if you wanted to play the game, then you're
Mm-hmm.
not really going to be spoiled on anything. Like
Yeah,
you can
that
just,
shows that the game's very deep. It has a lot of depth to the point where multiple playthroughs can be played very differently.
right, exactly, which I think is definitely good game design. Like there's
That's
a lot of
yeah.
things that can make a good game design and depending on what kind of game you have.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess combat doesn't necessarily have to be one of those factors, but
It
for someone
doesn't.
like
Yeah, it
you,
doesn't really.
it's definitely a very good high point because it is kind of main
Mhm.
gameplay-ish.
I tend to focus towards depth of combat because that gives the player literal options. Kind of like
Hmm.
something like when I look at Dante and I go, hell yeah, it's Dante, is because when I play a Devil May Cry game, I, the player playing as Dante, am physically able to do things that are so extraneously awesome and amazing and complex that it almost leaves other games wanting. Whereas
Hmm.
I'm familiar with the experience of something like Legend of Zelda and the gameplay I'm used to. You know, it's you have the attack button, you stand still to block, you have a bow, you have bombs, and it's not that this is bad gameplay. It's just that when I'm given,
It's repetitive gameplay.
and not even that's one of the things, but even past that, it's just that I can definitely see that I might be spoiled with something like Dante because you know you can have so much fun with one enemy encounter as opposed to with something like Legend of Zelda, where something like the Divine Beasts are your highlight encounters. They're the big ones, right? They're the box art. You
Hmm.
put them up on there, you go and fight them, and they're great. They're sick boss fights.
Hmm.
Whereas something like Devil May Cry, even the most basic enemy becomes entertaining combat because you, the player, can make the conscious choice to, you know what, yeah, I am gonna combo the basic normal enemy of this game with 100 hits. You don't need to do that, but you can.
Hmm.
And so I always do like combat complexity because it's something that you always have the opportunity to affect because it's player controlled. Like I mean, literally, it's just control complexity. I can control something that's very complex, whereas a game can be deep in many ways and complex in many ways and have a lot of options in many ways. And I like most of them, but where I personally like a lot of depth in options is where with the player character control, because I feel like that will always push the game further in quality because I can ignore bad graphics if my character does cool shit on the screen.
Hmm.
Yep.
I'm trying to think like what about things like ancient arrows and Breath of the Wild. I'm pretty sure you might have seen one where there's like this big kind of black hole explosion that happens.
Yeah, I've seen the design. I think the arrow types are a really great mechanic the game doesn't do a good enough job giving you like a preview of.
Hmm.
Um, if at let's say you had an intro with the arrow, right? Like let's say you had an intro with the bow. Like they should have even made an old man mission about it, where you meet the old man, and part of the beginning mission is like you go and get a weapon, right? It gives you the
Mhm.
axe, I think, or you get the axe next to him. And one of his missions is go and cook some food. If he had had a mission where he gives you the bow and he gives you a normal arrow, a fire arrow, and like an ice arrow, and talks about how there's a large number of arrows, all of which can do different things, you might, as a player, then suspect, oh, there's a lot of depth in the arrow gameplay, which there is. But you aren't given that impression by what you have in Breath of the Wild, which I think is kind of hindering itself.
Mhm. I guess that makes sense. Yeah. Um. But yeah, I feel like Devil May Cry, obviously Devil May Cry and Breath of the Wild are two different like separate games that are trying
Yes,
to do totally different things, and
it
they are
is. It
probably
yeah,
for different audiences.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
It is
But
unfair to compare them to each other 100% because they are completely different games.
yeah, I want
I
to see how Genshin Impact is going to actually work, because it's obviously like inspired, I guess, from Breath of the Wild. But like,
it's
I
definitely
want to
yeah.
see how it develops, like, because obviously it has a pretty kind of in-depth combat system, I guess. Like, it's more in-depth than Breath of the Wild's, where it's
Yes.
kind of like
The
you
combat in
have
Genshin is definitely there's more to it.
right. There's definitely more to it than Breath of the Wild. But it doesn't really like let you explore that much, I guess, if that makes sense. Like,
Mhm.
and
It
I don't know how
trades it
actually
trades
exploring, will work, but
yeah, it trades overworld size for game complexity.
mhm,
Where the gameplay loops are more unique and control is more complex at the cost of shortening the size of the game world. Which it goes back to that thing you brought up earlier. It's like, well, what happens when you have to stop developing? Like, obviously,
mhm.
realistically, a game can't have everything. So
Yeah,
usually,
I was going to say that
Mhm.
like obviously I think Breath of the Wild, like for you whenever you said that Devil May Cry, like obviously like there is a stopping there's no stopping point or whatever where what you want from Devil May Cry or whatever.
Mhm.
I feel like Breath of the Wild does have a stopping point when that is when you definitely began it, because it has this big like grand finale where you're using a light bow or riding
Yeah,
on a horse destroying different parts of Dark East Ganon,
you
and
get.
like and that part's epic, and then it ends up with this final cutscene where Zelda's like, "Do you remember me?"
Mhm.
And then you're just like, "Wow!" Like you're just like you could just sit down, you're like,
Yeah,
like that was good. But and even and even when you sit down and do that, you probably haven't even explored everything that the game had to offer at that moment, but you're probably done for the game at that moment.
yes.
So I
Um,
feel like there's a good stopping point, and that is even if you haven't explored everything, you explored most of what the game you wanted to explore.
Yep. So yeah, that brings up a good point where it's like you have thematic and climactic finishes,
Hmm.
but then you also have like gameplay finishes, and those are two separate things most of the time because Breath of the Wild gives you a very good climactic ending where it all comes to a head and you're satisfied both with the story and the gameplay.
Hmm.
Most people are definitely willing to sit there and go, "What a great game! I'm finished." Right? Like I finished it. Whereas I'll give the example in something like Super Mario 64, and why Super
Hmm.
Mario 64 is so replayable is that you get a thematic finish when you finally get that 100% ending, all
Hmm.
120 stars, and Bowser goes, "What? You got all of them? Ah, I guess we'll sit back and watch the ending together. Come on, minions," right? And you get a thematic ending. But afterwards, you could absolutely say to yourself, "Well, that game was so fun that I want to play it again in a different level order." Because
Hmm.
and one of the reasons why I personally like control depth more than game depth, well, there's the same thing.
Right.
Why I like control depth more than like game design depth, still the same thing. Why I like control depth more than overworld depth, I'll make it very literal, is because control depth can make up for a lot of things
Hmm.
and can be very memorable because it's impressionable. It's the literal control, it's the input you have. And if that input that you're able to do, the part where you're actually like doing things in game unique to
Hmm.
yourself, if that is very complex and you get a lot of enjoyment out of just that aspect, there's a lot of replayability to that. And so you can definitely have a disconnect between climactic and gameplay finishes because the game can end, but you want to play more. So going back to like Devil May Cry 5, you get the final boss fight with Virgil, but after you do that, the game says, by the way, you just unlocked hard mode. And you might say, I absolutely want to play hard mode, even though it's the same game you just played. There's more. There's more for you to do. And
Right.
even if it's the same literal 20 missions, the gameplay is so deep that what it has to offer you keeps you wanting to have that fun experience even through the same levels. The
Like
encounters might be edited a little, but it's just what you do in game, physically controlling the character, that gives it this great replayability and depth.
right. I like to mention you mentioned Mario 64, and
Mm-hmm.
that's actually a really good example because they literally put in the game if you're able to go up to there's a cannon that unlocks when you beat the game.
Yes.
And or when you get all 120 stars.
Yeah,
And
when
when
you
you
get
get
the
up to the
final
roof,
ending.
you when you go up to the roof of Peach's castle, you can find Yoshi there, and Yoshi is
Yes.
like, "Thank you so much for playing Super Mario 64. You got all 120 stars. I can't believe you did it."
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like a sign or whatever that says, or Yoshi gives you a bunch of one ups or whatever
He
or
gives
something like that,
you,
and then
yeah.
he leaves. And then
Yes.
there's a sign that says, "Thank you for thank you, this from the developers. Thank you for playing Super Mario 64.
Mm-hmm.
We really wanted, but we really want you to keep playing the game. So we're giving you a bunch of lives to like do whatever you want to explore the game."
Yeah, to explore the
Which they
game.
so it's kind of like they definitely knew what they were doing with the gameplay, and that they wanted it to be like
Mm-hmm.
you wanted to keep playing this game even after you got everything in the
Yep.
game.
They wanted the
You know
gameplay to stick out to the player because they knew it would kind of keep up beyond the ending. Um,
exactly.
they also got lucky because, going back to stuff like tech, whether it's intentional or unintentional, Mario 64 got very lucky where it has a lot of unintentional depth, where the mechanics of the game, the acceleration mechanics, the movement mechanics allowed for further depth than the game had to offer. But even ignoring just like the unintentional tech and options and depth, you still have just a very good basis of a game. It's
Hmm.
just accentuated by the fact that you can do dumb stuff like backwards long jumping or abusing like mechanics to do cool movement options that you thought weren't possible beforehand. Um, and so
Hmm.
I guess that's just the reason why I always did value like control depth, because it can really go a long way. It's
Right.
in my mind, it always seems more memorable.
So I'm gonna make a guess that you really like Super Mario Odyssey then because of its controls.
I and I'm not just saying this for the curveball. I thought Super Mario 60 Odyssey was actually okay.
But did you like the movement of Mario, like being able to do like backflip double jumps, like and bouncing off
I
Cappy, doing all this cool like air movement or whatever, getting around places? Like, didn't you enjoy that
Mhm.
like kind of aspect where you can basically like where it was like Devil May Cry, where you can develop all like these weapons have development or whatever that you could
Mhm.
do
There's a lot of
chain different
depth to them.
combos.
Yeah, there's a lot
Yeah,
of
in
depth to
Mario,
them.
it's essentially that, but just with parkour, you can just chain different like
Yeah.
jumps together to make go dis travel different distances or whatever.
Where Dante has weapon depth, whereas Mario has jump depth. And
Hmm.
this is true. Mario Odyssey does have a deep movement system. Um,
Here's the thing with that though. I
mhm.
do love moving in Mario Odyssey though,
It
but
is
I
fun.
don't want to keep playing the game because I don't have anything else to do in the game. There's nothing for me
Yes.
to do after you've beaten it and did all the after game content.
Yeah.
So,
The problem Mario Odyssey comes to is that it it's kind of very similar to Breath of the Wild, where it presents to you a very linear path, and the gameplay has depth to it, but at no points in time does the gameplay's depth um, really lend credence to you experiencing the game better, because the methods of which you can go around getting moons, the way that you do this, um, it differs like visually, but not necessarily actually. There's times where this is definitely false, right? There's definitely some moons where you can get them out of order specifically because of the movement system is deep, and
mhm,
those are nice. But I think what Mario Odyssey has as a problem is that the levels definitely went for the more not better approach, and so you get giant levels with a lot of throwaway moons. So
Right.
you can't really like buckle down and say like I want to figure out the best route to get this moon because the route to this moon is walking in a straight line to a cactus and then you get a
Hmm.
moon. And what Super Mario 64 has going for it is that the star is literally just kind of put onto the map most times. There's
Right.
not a lot of things you have to do to get there, but it's put on a part of the map where you have to physically go around a trip to get there. And it with using the deep movement, you can circumvent the path to get to said star um, in a more interesting and usually faster way that encourages you to use the deep gameplay. Whereas Mario Odyssey, you're usually not encouraged to use cool deep like methods of getting moons because the moons are so simplistic and sporadically placed.
Right.
One example I can think of where movement is encouraged is instances where the Luigi Balloon DLC,
Hmm.
where when you get on the higher up lists of people who have like near impossible balloons rather, they end up using that movement system to create a really difficult path. So of
Hmm.
course, you'd end up with people who abuse the mechanics to put it in an impossible location, but then you also have people who, you know, would put a really interesting, fun route that required you to use the deep movement mechanics to achieve a goal. And I think Super Mario Odyssey would have definitely benefited from shortening the moon number way down. Because at the end of Super Mario Odyssey, you should have like 700, 800 moons.
Hmm.
How many of them are
Actually,
memorable?
you should actually have like just 500 moons, and you're
500,
supposed to get
500.
like
Yeah, that's
999, and you can
yeah.
just eat, and the African content allows you to get all the
Mm-hmm.
rest of them.
Yeah, that's the number. It's 500 to beat it, and then 999 is max, and then you can keep going past that with like purchase moons or whatever. But um, how many of the 500 moons were memorable is where the problem lies, because
There
there are
there are a few
memorable
memorable moons, of
moons.
course. Like some of them are just
Mhm.
randomly placed,
Yes.
but I do remember a lot of missions like getting a band together and stuff
Mm-hmm.
and also they have, even if you don't have the regular moons, like they still have the chain moons or whatever, the three chain moons that are stuck together or
Yeah, the
whatever
the
they're
big
called.
story missions are the multi moons.
Right, exactly.
You would usually
Those
have a
ones
boss
are
fight that
really
led
good.
to the multi moon. Yeah.
Yeah. I
I.
think, but I feel like what Mario Odyssey does, instead of like with Mario 64, where you can take a path to get that, and the path you like, how you do that path is up to you. I feel like it's different in like, instead of just the path, it's the entire game. Like you have this whole free set of movement and stuff, and how you beat the game with that movement is dependent on you, which is why there's so many moons in the game, because you can just like get whatever moons you want and leave the other moons behind if you want. Or if you're a collector, you get every single moon or whatever. Or if you're a speedrunner, just get the
Mhm.
minimum requirement of moons, which makes it so that you can play Mario Odyssey in so many different ways. And because the moveset is so expansive, like, and that people keep replaying this game because like it's so expansive like that. Like there's
Mhm.
so many people like Small Ant who do different like playthroughs of the game where he does it with like plays it with his feet. He does it where he just plays it with one hand or plays it with another person doing one side of the controller and him doing
Mhm.
the other side, and like one where he sometimes does do mods where it's like the floor is lava where you can't touch the floor and stuff like that, because the moveset is so expansive that you can actually get around that kind of stuff. That's kind of why that's what I feel like Mario Odyssey was kind of trying to achieve.
Yeah. Mario Odyssey definitely went for this big
Uh,
bombastic
It went
experience.
for the long run instead of the short run, I guess.
I
If
mean,
that makes sense.
maybe not necessarily in that regard. Um, I think it went for game length. Yeah, I think it just went for game length being replayable, and I think it achieves this well. But I do think the game would have benefited from a shortening of the number of moons and maybe a shortening per map, because this is an instance where I think I mentioned this before. You could say it's like good or bad, it's subjective, but I think Super Mario Odyssey, you get a very definitively entertaining and fun experience at 500 moons. Um, Whereas with Super Mario 64, you feel compelled and entertained up to the max 120 moons. Whereas I can definitely imagine many scenarios of people getting to the 500 Odyssey moons and go like, okay, I'm done, right? Like I've finished the game. Here's where I'll complete it. Because obviously not every moon's going to be amazing, but the problem you might run into is that creating a bigger overworld with a larger number of moons gives more opportunity to have players choose their own path and lead to a moon anyway. As opposed
Mhm.
to giving players the option to have multiple paths to one star, you have players that have multiple paths to unique moons, which is a different design that can work by itself in different ways. But
I see what you mean. Yeah.
yeah, it comes with its own problems because when you have a number of moons that aren't winners, you end up with an arbitrary number of moons that lead you to the most fun, right?
Right.
Like you end up going like, all right, moon 1, 3, 7, 17, 18, 19, 21, and 25 were the most fun. Make sure to do those and skip the rest. It's like if in game testing Nintendo had decided to throw a bunch of moons at the game testers and the game testers came back and said these were the fun ones and only kept those, I think the Mario Odyssey experience would be improved.
I can understand, but
Mm.
there are also like different opinions, I guess,
Yeah, it's a
like on which
subjective
one's more
view.
fun and stuff. So for the people who do want those moons that think those are actually fun and they're removed, it's kind of just like, well, you know,
Yeah.
like they're missing out, I guess. I guess what Nintendo does is accessibility,
Yeah.
despite
Nintendo,
despite
despite not
removing their
wanting people to play
games.
their games, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, it all comes down to like development idealisms because Nintendo always values less depth but more accessibility. Uh,
right.
whereas there's
I mean,
reasons
the
for
Wii was basically that.
yes, the Wii was very much that. But see, why what I come to problems with is that I think that's a false dichotomy. I think it's super possible to have a very in-depth game that's also accessible. Not every
Mhm.
game has to have like hand you a manual and D&D moveset so that you can learn to play it. Um, there are a large number of examples of games that are very deep but start you completely understandably in a good
Sorry.
tutorial. Huh?
Sorry, I was like, I wonder what the first video that come up on YouTube is when I check YouTube, and it's Max's reaction to Sephiroth and
Yeah,
Smash.
of course. I got to go watch that later,
Yeah. Anyway, continue. Sorry.
yeah, I think the idea that the more complex your game is, the less accessible it is a false dichotomy because that's all in
Yeah, I don't understand that.
how
I
the
don't understand that
game
statement.
yeah, it all comes down to how the game presents itself. I think a game like Smash, it worries too much in being accessible that it hinders itself in the long run because there's people who could look at the depth of Smash and do good things with it and inspire others to enjoy the game more because they see the depth of it.
I
Whereas,
feel like, but if you feel, I feel like if people who don't play Smash and they see the depth of Smash,
mhm,
like are turned away from the game because of the depth, because they just don't want to get into like the they don't want to get deep dive into it.
I can't imagine that scenario though. Like I don't
With people who don't play video games, I guess, because
yeah,
Smash
but
was kind of meant for
in
everyone.
in the reality of someone who doesn't play video games, I don't they see any kind of gameplay and get turned off of it?
Yeah, you're right. You're true. But I feel like there should be a game that just,
If
will invite new players. Which I feel like Nintendo does do that well sometimes,
mhm.
especially with Mario. But
but
like,
but you
eh.
see, you don't have to hinder your depth to be accessible to people. Like I don't think making Smash deeper or making it, more control heavy and focusing on like its complexity will ever hinder it in the long run because I can't imagine a scenario where someone goes like, oh, Smash is deep, like there's more to this game than like what I thought. Yeah, I'm not gonna play this. um
Yeah.
Smash in particular, like I say always, it's a good game, but I think it would benefit if Sakurai or the development team took a step back and asked themselves how they could improve what they have right now, as opposed to adding more. Because, like what happens every time that a DLC character gets put in, problems that are already there stay there. And the DLC character gets added, and, the DLC character can be good or bad, but if it's just sort of put on existing problems, the foundation you're giving is going to crumble eventually, right? Because if the fault of your gameplay is like sitting at the top, then you can address it then, and it's not an issue. But if you just sort of put things on top of it, it will become like integrated into it. So like I think one of the issues that I have with Smash is that they added in like visual effects to the game. Like whenever you hit a Falcon Punch or whatever, the screen goes blue for a second for big attacks like that. And that's cool sometimes in a 1v1. It makes the game
but
visually,
it hinders like on 2v2s.
but it hinders multiple people playing because it will visually stay on screen longer, causing the hitbox to linger in midair. So if you are used to the 1v1, if you're used to normal gameplay where the hitbox stays for a certain amount of time and then it's suddenly unexplainedly longer on the screen, like it lasts longer for no particular reason, that to me is gameplay oversight. Like that's game testers that didn't do their job well enough, because that hitbox staying out too long is a problem. And that's kind of game depth that if was looked at more, I think Smash could be improved. To me, Smash is a problem of little things. Like the overarching things about Smash are all great. Like character visually all look great. Visual designs are all there, right?
Dude, I absolutely hated when people were like, "Oh, dude, this is just a port of the Wii U version," because it wasn't. It wasn't a port of the Wii U
at
version.
all. Yeah. I definitely hated that too, because they literally
Because obviously it was an improvement. Like I think what
Mhm.
Ultimate did really well is that instead of because Smash was always supposed to be like a crossover fighter of all these, like a celebration of Nintendo and or video game history,
It was
right?
it was a good
And but
celebration
what
of gaming.
Right, but what Ultimate did was instead of celebrating more on the gaming aspect, they celebrated more on the Ultimate or the Smash aspect of it and improved upon more of the Smash side than they did with the. That's why I think that the
Mhm.
character roster or whatever, like yeah, you might think that's probably the gaming celebration side, but I think it was more the Smash side and the Smash history side, especially because it shows with the roster like placement where they put like the order of what they enter the Smash series in,
Yeah,
right?
the
I,
roster is physically laid out how
right.
they were introduced by what game.
Right, and
I
I think
think
they
that's good
definitely
design.
like improved the Smash side of things more than the gaming side, especially because they cut the content that people didn't prefer in Smash, and they kept the content that people really loved, and like story mode came back and stuff, even though it wasn't a good story mode. I feel like, um, I think that like they kind of just it was more of a just a celebration and improvement in
Mhm.
Smash itself than it
Yeah.
was just like a celebration of gaming.
I think like I actually 100% agree with you, because I think Smash Ultimate is the best Smash in every way except for gameplay. I think
Right.
Melee is still the best game, which comes down to a very difficult decision. Like if I want to play Smash with somebody, do I
Like,
want to play
would you want to play a more fixed, like, kind of more like refined version of
Mhm.
Smash, where like not everything is as good and not like, but you
like
still like
the
it's still kind
visual,
of fun
like
to play, or would
every
you rather play the broken version that was kind of accidentally good?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no. I don't think that's the dichotomy between the two at all. I think Melee is the gameplay refined one. I think Melee
But it
has
was
the
what I meant by
refined
it is like
gameplay.
accidentally created to
Mm-hmm.
be like good.
It it's not that it was accidentally good, it's that it was accidentally better than it was supposed to be. It was good by itself, but
Hmm.
things like wave dashing and other tech like that, like L canceling, inadvertently made the game even better than good. So it went from good to very good. Um, the gameplay aspect of Melee will always, I think always will be the best, because um, even though it was accidental, stuff like L canceling and um, wave dashing, grab techs, there's a bunch of them. I don't know the name of all of them. Um, inadvertently made the gameplay very tight. It was a very good experience because it was complex, one, and two, when you have a very set game, you know, yes, no updates, but also kind of yay, no updates. You have a
Hmm.
not necessarily a solved experience, but a very stable experience. So if what you can produce consistently is very good, you have made a good game. And Melee, being a game that can't get updated or changed in any way, is what it is. And what it is a very, very tight competitive experience that provides the most deep gameplay of the entire series. So when you want to seek the best gameplay and you find Melee and you see what it has to offer you and you understand like the gameplay, what it has to offer just can't be topped, because even though every other aspect can be improved, the music can be improved, the visuals can be improved, the presentation can be improved, the story can be improved, the game modes available can be improved, the roster can be improved, like regardless of that, the gameplay is encapsulated in a moment in time, because I don't think Nintendo will ever add stuff like L canceling in again, making, you know, some of the gameplay aspect deeper.
Hmm.
Uh, and if Melee's the deepest you could go in Control, it will always have a reason to be played. Because if Melee was deeper, Melee players would have, you know, switched over. They would have actually started playing Melee. Um, but
Well,
you know,
what if they intentionally put those things back in if a new Smash came out?
I think that's a good design, because even though it came from a mistake, stuff like wave dashing, not necessarily a mistake, it was just an oversight. Uh,
Which, I mean, I guess it technically is mistake. Like an
yeah,
oversight mistake is the same kind of word, but
technically,
yeah,
it's inadvertently. A mistake would imply that like, yeah, you're right, you're right.
yeah. Go ahead.
So as an oversight, um, it inadvertently makes the game better. Uh, if you added this back in purposefully, you're still making the game better, right? I don't think they're taking any kind of loss by putting stuff like out canceling or wave dashing, better defensive options, um, grab teching being better. Like, I don't think these changes, which improve gameplay or add depth to gameplay, would ever like be a problem to add in, because there's stuff like Slap City, you know, the knockoff Smash, right?
One with the muscle guy in it,
Yeah,
right?
Fish
Oh,
Buru or whatever his name
yeah.
is.
He's also, oh yeah, Fish Bujin, I think his
Yeah,
name is.
Fish
He's
Bujin.
also gonna be in Frame Makers. So
He is. I saw that, and that game, Slap City, has L canceling. It has moonwalking. It has wave dashing, and by adding in that depth, its gameplay becomes very uniquely tight. It's very Melee. Uh, I mean, it's visually Smash, but it's physically Melee.
mhm.
And something like Ultimate, if it were to add back in that complexity, it would just be an improvement. You would just improve the game at that point in time. It's kind of like how I said earlier, where you have Devil May Cry, you have Dante, where he had the real impact, distorted real impact, where that was a mistake in Devil May Cry 4, but they kept it in for Devil May Cry 5 because of just how cool distorted real impact was.
Right.
Yeah, I
I
think
guess what you mean.
yeah, they would only benefit from adding in past mistakes as mechanics, which is why Ultimate is just as good, like is just as good as it is, because Ultimate, they added in air dashing. They added
Right.
back in air dashing, and it's not the same as like wave dashing, but Melee has air dashing. It's just an abuse of air dashing that creates wave dashing, but you know, air dashing by itself is already a huge improvement in gameplay, because it's one of the things that all of the other games outside of Melee lacked, was defensive options in air. How are you gonna avoid like
Sephiroth when he
how
tries to poke the
yeah,
air.
let's think about the world of Sephiroth where you don't have air dashing.
If
It
if Sephiroth gets the neutral, you know, like the
Mhm.
neutral where they spin the sword around. If he
Yes.
gets that, and it's like the longest reaching like neutral air, it's gonna be so broken.
Yeah, at that point it's just like give up, man. Like put your controller down. You're not playing the game anymore. Are you in air? You're out of here, right?
Dude, I just realized Oh my gosh, freaking edge guarding is gonna be insane with Sephiroth with his
Mm-hmm.
long-reaching sword.
If
You're not
his
even gonna be able to get close to the edge.
if his down air is like melee Mars down air, where if you hit it, it just spikes you, you're out of there, son. Like,
If
get
his
out of
grab
here.
range is like Mario.
If he's Marth from melee, like it's over. I mean,
Dude,
he basically Marth
I
from melee.
I also saw, just for quick talking about the Sephiroth trailer, there was like
Mm-hmm.
a projectile he did where, well, not really a projectile, but he locked on like two, three different like orbs onto
It
a
was three
player and then
orbs that circled a
activated them.
player. So he
Yeah.
had a killer queen move, which means I'm buying him. So
Yeah.
yeah, the thing about Sephiroth, we could talk about Sephiroth for a little bit. Sephiroth is, I said it before, he's the coolest character Final Fantasy ever produced. There's a
Mhm.
lot of good Final Fantasy characters. Actually, there's a lot of them. But Sephiroth is so cool that even being the main antagonist of the seventh
He
game in the
was cool enough to
series,
get into Smash. No other like Final Fantasy 7, like no other
like
Final Fantasy protagonist got in Smash. Sephiroth got in Smash.
like everyone likes Cloud because he's the protagonist of everyone's favorite Final Fantasy, and Cloud's second best. But Cloud isn't in every Kingdom Hearts game. He's
Mhm.
in one of them, two now, I think. You know who is in every Kingdom Hearts game?
Sephiroth. Well, actually, he's
Sephiroth.
not in every King.
He's in
Wait, is he in
almost.
like every single Kingdom Hearts game, or is
He's in a
he
lot of them. He's in the DS ones. He's in Kingdom Hearts 1, 2, and 3.
in the? Is he in the in the
He is in the
rhythm
GBA
game?
one. I don't He is in the Rhythm game cuz his song's in it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, One Winged Angel remix for Kingdom Hearts. Yeah, it's absolutely a song in there.
That's awesome.
It is awesome cuz One Winged Angel is also a great track. It's just Sephiroth is recognizable as it gets. He is
That's why they showed him for the Game Awards.
That's why
Honestly,
they chose him for the Game
I
Awards.
never actually thought about that. And now that we have Sephiroth, we're probably never gonna get Sora because that is our last Square Enix character we're
Yeah,
gonna get.
yeah, get him out of here. Thank God, right?
Yeah. Could
uh,
you imagine? Thank
oh,
goodness
dude,
we
the
get a better broken character.
dude, the universe and where that reveal trailer was Sora from Kingdom Hearts. I didn't watch the whole thing. The
You put it
recording
right then and there.
ends with Kingdom
Yo,
Hearts.
your Rodney's on. You want to get Rodney in this real quick?
Oh, is he? Hold on. I have a image pulled up called Game Discussion Time. One sec.
Are you still recording, by the way?
Yes.
Ah, nice. You got the whole conversation. We can just.
Si, senor.
It's basically just another podcast episode.
I don't think anyone else is up for being in. I mean, I was about to finish. There were just a few more pieces I wanted to hit on, and then I was gonna
Oh yeah,
call it. Yeah, I was gonna call it a recording because at this point
yeah, right.
it's
Yeah.
essentially a
What
podcast.
else would we miss from the Game Awards? I like the Among Us map, but you probably haven't played Among Us, or you haven't ever played Among Us, so I guess
Yeah, it's
can't really
not
touch on that.
it's not for me to say. I don't really have anything to add. I mean, it's an Among Us map.
What game really interested you the most though, out of the ones you saw, besides Sephiroth, of course?
Actually, Crimson Desert.
Crimson Desert.
So,
Then besides that as well, because we did also discuss that.
oh yeah, okay. Did we? I don't think we discussed it here. Like we discussed it when we saw it, but I don't think we gave a discussion. I'll
We
give.
did touch on it once, but
I'll
it
give.
wasn't much to see. They would just show the combat mostly.
Mhm.
Um,
I will give
but
one description as to why I got so hype at that game in particular. Like I said earlier, I can tell just looking at something visually, kind of a very offhand, basic understanding of how deep a gameplay can be, because the gameplay is some of the things that are very recognizable. You look at Smash gameplay, and it's a very recognizably Smash. So that's why when
mhm,
you see a spin-off or a copy of Smash, you go, oh, that's just Smash. Because it's very
mhm,
visually apparent. So when I looked at like the Crimson Desert gameplay, and I saw like the first instance where it went from a cutscene to gameplay, like you're actually seeing the guy swing a sword, doing throw moves. I'm going, hold on, wait a minute, because I suspected that game to just be like third person press square to do attack, but what I
you're right.
got was fucking running DDT this guy like a badass, which is games don't do that, right? I'm thinking,
Right.
what game allows you to fucking running DDT guys? None of them. None. No. Only good games. only good games have running DDTs, right?
This was made by the guys in Korea.
It was made by South Korean Entertainment. Let me tell you, South Korea. I have another South Korean game in Steam. Hold on a minute.
What's it called?
There's a game called Bloody Spell that I bought because it was a Devil May Cry clone. And no,
Was it a good
not
Devil May Cry clone?
not necessarily a Devil May Cry clone. It was a character action game, which are games that focus on very in-depth.
It's basically Devil May
control.
Cry.
Basically,
Bayonetta.
Yeah,
Bayonetta.
yeah, Devil May Cry, Bayonetta. Those are character action games, which are action hack and slash games that focus more on self-control as opposed to game develop like maps, whatever. Right. The difference between like Skyrim and Devil May Cry is that
I'd say
you know
Warriors games are probably like a good middle ground for those kind of like, but in between for those kind of two genres.
the Warriors games are like their own genres. The character they're like stylish character action where they're not very deep. Actually, they're just visually entertaining. That where you can look at them for a long time and go, oh, that's I'm looking at things happen on screen when I press the button, but like you're not doing complex
pretty
math.
effects happening on screen. I like that. What's this button do?
Exactly. That's exactly it. Where it's visually deep but not actually deep. But this game Bloody Spell that I have on Steam, I got because I looked at the gameplay and it actually I was going like, hey, for a foreign game that has poor localization translation, the gameplay actually looks really solid. And sure enough, I bought the game and I opened it up. The gameplay's solid. There's air combat. You got air combos. The game looks sick. Plays sick too. And I'm going, wow, someone put good effort into this gameplay. And it's evident just visually. And of course, I got hands-on with controller, and then I physically understood what gameplay felt like for that game. But visually, you can tell in-depth gameplay from non-in-depth gameplay, because non-in-depth gameplay, it looks similar to you. It looks like run-of-the-mill. Like visually, the animation work is visual, but no punch, no bite, no bark. If you look at Devil May Cry combat, there's nothing quite like it. It's incredibly unique. It's like art in motion. If you see Devil May Cry 4 Bloody Palace runs, you see people like sweating on webcam doing dumb combos that you don't need to do, but do anyway because you're cool. And that's a benefit.
Because you're cool.
Because you're cool. No other game really makes you feel
bad.
Yeah, that is the thesis statement of Devil May Cry. No game makes you feel quite as cool as the game that says, hey, if you wanted to do a move where you throw your sword and create a whirlwind that traps your enemy just long enough for you to charge up an uppercut so strong that your enemy literally explodes instantly, you can do that.
What about like RPGs?
RPGs are an interesting study because there's a lot of different types. You have JRPGs, you have the modern Western RPG.
What about Final Fantasy though?
Final Fantasy.
Because you mentioned Sephiroth being like the most badass character, right? But like he's from an RPG.
Yeah, he is from an RPG. What do I think about the gameplay? That's where things get very interesting because JRPGs are notoriously awful, notoriously bad. They're
I kind of like the strategy of RPGs, even though like the visually it doesn't look as great. I do like the strategy kind of aspect to it.
They can be. JRPGs have a very difficult task to make themselves good, and that's the task of how do we stretch out gameplay that is as shallow as pressing the attack button and watching you do the attack over an 80-hour game. And many different games have many different ways of mitigating this. Earthbound, they don't. Earthbound does not. Earthbound instead.
I think Earthbound and Undertale keep you invested with their story.
That's what I was about to say. The the gameplay isn't great, but the story of which the gameplay is the medium of is fantastic. Earthbound's a one-of-a-kind experience. It's great. I'm not the biggest Earthbound fanboy. I think Mother 3 is better. I think you should play Mother 3 only. Well, I think you should see someone play Earthbound so you understand who Porky is, but then also play
I
the
know.
other
Yeah.
three.
He's the
Um,
guy in Smash,
he's
right?
the
The
guy
guy
in
that
Smash.
plays the boss guy in
He's the
Smash.
guy. He's in Subspace Emissary. Yeah, you forget the part where he's like a terrorist and that he murdered your brother and that he's the biggest piece. Yeah, you're missing all that part, but yeah, you're right. He's the guy from Smash.
Yeah.
But like Earthbound is a JRPG, and the gameplay is literally go to the PSI menu, select Shield Up Alpha, watch the animation of the screen flash, and then your characters have a shield. Then select the attack button. Watch as you hit the enemy for blank damage. Uh-oh, you took damage. Consume the health item. Like, it's very simple. And
Hmm.
not a lot is done to make it complex. But that's not where the
Right.
strength of the game is. The strength of the game is in the story. Just like Undertale. Undertale has one benefit where the defense... Hold on, let me pull up my image again. The defense aspect of Undertale, where you're dodging attacks from other enemies, is what makes the game good. Well, not what makes the game good. The story's what makes the game good, but it's what makes it slightly more interesting than something like Earthbound, because Earthbound's such a very good starting discussion point for JRPGs because it's the JRPG. Team of
Hmm.
four, look at your enemy, press
Well, I
attack
wouldn't say
button.
it's the RPG. I would call
Probably
the
Dragon Quest.
RPG Dragon Quest. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right, but not less people have played Dragon Quest than Earthbound, which is weird, but true.
It is kind of weird. I mean, I actually haven't played Earthbound, but I have played Dragon Quest 11,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I really did enjoy Dragon Quest 11, despite what you said about like not many visuals having on screen. I did kind of enjoy like Dragon Quest has a very quirky story every time, and
Yes,
I find that entertaining.
it's a very
Um, it's
interestingly
not as
written characters.
right. It's not as good as Earthbound's, but I was entertained.
It was entertaining enough to bring you to the end of the game, which is important.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even like sometimes gameplay styles, like for RPGs, like Xenoblade, I think I kind of enjoyed the gameplay of Xenoblade. Eventually, I did.
Yeah.
Like at first, I dropped the game because I didn't get into it as much. But then but when I got bored because I didn't have enough games to play, I went back to it and I discovered it was actually
Mm-hmm.
really well done.
Yeah, there was more
But
there than what you thought there was.
exactly. But I don't know about Final Fantasy because I've never actually played a Final Fantasy game, which I know is probably a
Mm-hmm.
sin. But
Yeah, I just wanted to say one more thing before I went into Final Fantasy is that there's another problem JRPGs tend to come into outside of like the very simplistic gameplay, and that's the length of gameplay. So like the gameplay loop of pressing the attack button, watch enemy die, is stretched over a large period of time, and usually any barriers and difficulty in gameplay is very artificial, literally artificial, where it's just an enemy that has more damage than you do. They hit harder and they take more damage. So all you have to do is go back a little bit and get more levels, which is one of the problems that that Dragon Quest 11 runs into. Whereas Dragon
yes,
Quest 11, you will hit a wall and
yeah,
you will understand that, okay, I will now have to go grind and come back to the wall. This will happen a number of times, and that's not good design.
That is
Um,
right, but I did whenever I did go try to grind, I did
mhm.
get to a point where I was able to beat the boss eventually. And
Yes.
sometimes in RPGs, you can be able to eat like even if you're not strong enough to beat the boss, there are different tactics you can use to
Mhm.
get around
You
and
can
defeat the boss
mitigate,
in different
yeah,
ways.
you can mitigate having lower levels by having a strategy. That's
Hmm.
something that you can do with JRPGs. I think someone like Video Game Donkey, he points out like he finds JRPGs very boring because they're very time consuming and not like complex, like controller wise.
Hmm.
And I can understand what he means, but there's definitely a mindset you can have to make JRPGs more interesting. Because I think that the tiny little moments of strategy you have in a JRPG are interesting enough. You know, like moments in Dragon Quest when you're like, okay, now I got to use this health, spell right now. Like, oh, I don't have infinite MP, but I'm gonna use whatever I have right now to heal. Like, there are moments where you make those different decisions outside of just pressing the attack button that are interesting enough to compel you out of like complete and utter boredom.
Hmm.
Which I think the same way. There's a Dragon Quest game for the DS. the Luminaries, whatever. I always forget the name of it, but I like that game very much, even though it's very simple. It's a very simple game.
Right.
But what the game has to offer you in complexity is interesting enough to keep you playing it, which is where the game shines. Something like Final
Right.
Fantasy is always brought back to the same thing like Earthbound or Undertale, where it's the story that's the big good part of the game, and the gameplay each has just unique ways to make it interesting. So something like Final Fantasy VI, which a lot of people like that game because the gameplay has unique moments in which numbers are very obtrusive. So something like drop rate rarity in Final Fantasy VI is just sometimes ridiculous. Like some of the
Hmm.
best weapons in the game are put up to you against literally 1 in 1 million drop rates. Like getting one of those items makes you feel really good
Right.
because you understand you're put up against a very ridiculously artificial like wait time of luck. And that's nice, but moments of gameplay that get interesting are definitely moments in which you're able to use like a class's spell to its most effectiveness, or when you attack an enemy from the back and your screen shuffles a little bit differently than it normally does because you have two of your players on the back side and they do more damage and whatever. And so you have entire fights that are built around the mechanic where the boss turns around to face two people at a time. And, that's interesting. And then, of course, the story. People like Final Fantasy VI because of Kefka, good villain.
Hmm.
But then you get Final Fantasy VII, which is the definition of, like, it's a JRPG because it's Japanese as hell, man. Like, there's so
Hmm.
much wacky stuff in Final Fantasy VII. The experience Final Fantasy VII has to offer you is so incredibly unique that it was almost like the game that you can't make. Like, it's a game you can't make again. You can't replicate it. Nothing's ever going to be like Final Fantasy VII. And that's still true. The game's remade, and it's still untouched. Like, even considering what the remade could have been, like, or differently, whatever, like, it's still not a thing you could actually produce a second time because it's just so unique. So
Hmm.
Final Fantasy VII is unique because of such great character designs like Cloud, where even though I don't think he's the best ever, he,
Tifa.
Tifa, Polygon character, right? Um,
Hmm.
Barrett, Barrett, Mr. T, but he has a gun arm, and you get his backstory cutscene, and you're like, oh my god, he's not just Mr. T with a gun arm, he's actually a sick character with a pretty cool backstory. And then you're like, I get it. I understand why people like these characters. They all have their moments. Funnily enough, Cloud actually takes the longest time to have his moment where you're like, okay, Cloud's cool. Because Cloud, for the most part, it's kind of just like a snarky, he's funny, right? You can like Cloud for the most part because he's just like so apathetic, it's a joke. Like, you're like,
Hmm.
Cloud, are you just gonna sort of watch the plate fall out of the sky, crushing thousands of people to their deaths, and go, huh, that sucks? And the answer is yes. Cloud is going to look at millions of people dying and go, yeah, that's unfortunate. Because Cloud's kind of a dickhead.
Yeah, kind of an asshole.
And in being a dickhead, however, he becomes a unique character because there's not many protagonists that are literally put in scenarios like fighting for rebellion to save the planet and give the personality of, eh. A lot of them are complete straight edges where they're just goody two shoes, and it helps to have a character who's not just Mr. Does No Wrong all the time because sometimes it's really boring to be Mr. Does No Wrong. There's a lot of examples, something like LA Noir, where you play
Hmm.
Cole Phelps, right? Cole Phelps is a good character. He's got his qualities, but he's a complete and utter straight edge. He can physically not comprehend the idea of doing wrong because God forbid. And sometimes you go, God damn it, Cole, shut up. And the partner you're with, which is usually an asshole, says something like an asshole, and they be a huge giant asshole. But because Cole responds with, you're not as good as I am, or some shit like that, you're like, shut up, Cole, instead of going, wow, did Rusty just talk about how he divorced his wife again? And there's qualities to not being another straight edge. So Cloud is entertaining, But he doesn't become fantastic until 78 hours in, where you get a cool cutscene where you're like, wow, I wish I was playing as the guy who taught Cloud. Which then becomes a giant fault, which is Zack's cooler than Cloud is, but no one knows who the fuck Zack is, so never
Yeah.
mind that. Like, I'll give an example. Do you know who Zack is?
I vaguely do. Isn't Zach the guy that there was a super soldier or whatever, and he was like Cloud was like his like Zach was Cloud's mentor or whatever, and they were like super soldiers or something until like Zach somehow went into Cloud or something like that, or became Cloud. I don't remember exactly what it was, but
So, close, close. Zack was a soldier that worked with um, Sephiroth.
yes, that's right.
And Zack, being someone who worked alongside Sephiroth and other soldiers of, they're literally called Soldier. The military group's
Yeah.
literally called Soldier. I forgot about that part. Being a member of Soldier, being a soldier of Soldier, he did cool missions with Sephiroth. And he was, I mean, come on. He's the guy who hang around with Sephiroth. He's sick. He used the Buster Sword. He proprietarized the Buster Sword use. And Cloud was essentially mentored by Zack for the later half of Zack's existence. And essentially, Cloud was kind of imprinted with Zack's memories because Zack was super murdered dead. And Zack's kind of left off exactly like that, but Cloud has to play the role of the guy who went alongside Sephiroth so that it could help Soldier with their super soldier schemes. You know, they mess with a bunch of Mako energy, create cool, soldier guys, but, like,
Right.
we got to make them better. And then, we got to make a guy to counter this guy. And, it didn't work. And that Zack story, there's a game all about it. You can play as Zack in it. Final Fantasy, whatever, I forget what it's called. And it's sick, but nobody has played it ever. So the unfortunate reality of Zack is that although he's way cooler than Cloud is, he does not get the credit because nobody knows who he is.
Right.
He is a footnote in Final Fantasy VII that does not get the credit he deserves, and it's unfortunate because in fleshing out Zack, you would inadvertently flesh out Cloud, but they don't have the opportunity because there's a million other things that happen in Final Fantasy VII. So Final
Right.
Fantasy VII, you have 1,000,001 memorable moments, all the fights against Geneva, finding
Oh
Red
yeah.
13, Sephiroth's first appearance, which is it's like an hour. In the remake, it's like an hour in. You see Sephiroth very early. In Final Fantasy VII Original, you see him 8 hours in. It's very far from the beginning of the game. You have to go for a lot of nonsense before you can see Sephiroth. And for a lot of people who know both Cloud and Sephiroth long before they've ever played Final Fantasy VII and then attempt to play Final Fantasy VII, they usually go, why the hell is Sephiroth here? Because the truth is, he's introduced in a very strange way. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but it makes a huge impression, which helps Sephiroth's character a whole lot. Because I think during the development of Final Fantasy VII Original, the team realized that Sephiroth made an incredibly interesting character. So they probably switched writing to make him a good antagonist as opposed to maybe just a side character that popped up more than once, which is what like the red-headed guy with electric batons became and his crew that I forget the name of. Final Fantasy VII is just a very unique experience that a lot of people played because it is a PlayStation 1 game that they had easily accessible. It was a Square Enix slam dunk Final Fantasy VII. Everyone knows it, and they played it, and they ended up having a very good experience with it. And that's why Final Fantasy VII usually gets a lot of people's memories. My experience with Final Fantasy VII is very strange. I've tried to pick up the game and play it many times. I have it for the PlayStation 1. And I always get past the bombing mission and not very far after. I don't know if it's because I'm scared of the commitment of the literal 125 hours Final Fantasy VII asks of you, but I just always seem to drop it for some reason. And the gameplay is actually not bad too. there's a lot more strategy in like doing certain moves. The very first boss fight of the game, the Guardian Scorpion, there's actually a period of time where you have to wait and not attack him at all because he will then shoot you with the laser if you do, and you don't want to get shot with the laser. So
Yeah.
there's a lot more interesting fights. So even though the fighting is not complex, like incredibly complex, it's still more complex than average something like Earthbound or Dragon Quest, and it's entertaining then. And then past that, the story is also entertaining. That's all I have to say
Yeah.
on Final Fantasy VII. Other than Sephiroth is sick, he's cool.
Yeah.
His final boss is awesome.
hmm I'm just curious on how like someone like Max can
Mm-hmm.
love fighting games so much to the point where it's just every other game is kind of just like meh to him, and or like I don't care much about these other games. I just care more about fighting games and like
Mm-hmm.
Monster Hunter and stuff like that. But then like love something like Final Fantasy VII where it's like an RPG or whatever. I'm just like I don't understand how you love this much of this stuff, but the other stuff and there's like one thing in the other stuff that you do really love. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
how that correlates, but I guess that makes more sense the way you explain it.
Yeah, it seems like a strange outlier, but the reason
Mhm,
is probably he literally just played it as a kid. He probably
mhm,
just has a good experience and memory with Final Fantasy VII because Final Fantasy VII Original does have qualities that make it a fun experience gameplay wise too. Of course, the story is the more memorable aspect, but you could sit back and say, "Yeah, I had fun playing Final Fantasy VII as a game." And not always, but there are times in which that's the case. And Max, being a proprietor of the FGC, the legend he is, spoiled by a lot of very well designed games, which is what happens with fighting game players. Sometimes they play cool fighting games, and then other games are kind of like not as cool as those games, and then they're going like, oh, I forgot that good game design is not a universal thing. um,
mm,
So he can look at Final Fantasy VII, which does have good game design, and just really like the memories he had of it. He's a big
mhm.
Final Fantasy VII fanboy, which is funny because you can be a Final Fantasy fanboy, but in that group you can be specifically a Final Fantasy VII fanboy. Again,
Right.
that's just how big the experience is. Like, there's enough in just Final Fantasy VII that is the one that you like. I don't know anything about the rest, but Final Fantasy VII, that's the cool one.
Yeah. I'm very curious. I kind of want to like do an interview on you. That's how like I want to do an interview on your like opinion on video game philosophy.
I have a lot of things to say.
Right.
Uh,
That's exactly why I want to
yes,
interview you.
that would be
But
a cool one. If we were to do an interview, I want to get. Well, I mean, I could always just do an interview, kind of like detail. I'd want to do a thought piece, so like a video where I outline good game design in its entirety, big
yeah,
hour
that's
long.
why I would want to do like video games and like what you think a good video game is, like your opinion on like video game design and stuff like
Mhm.
that. Because you seem like you have a lot of opinions on it.
Yes, I do. I think I would know what makes a game good and what makes a game bad, and
Hmm
what a lot of people might accidentally end up doing that makes their game worse just because they don't know better or that they think wrong.
Right. I think same here. I do have a lot of opinions on video games, but I would
Hmm.
certainly like a lot more. That's why I'm interested in interviewing you. But uh, but yeah, we could just like I could just interview you and you could just upload on your channel and be like, interview with Kieran Paris. Who is he?
Who is the man behind the purple suit? Is he the man behind the slaughter? Or
Is
is he a
he the
JoJo
bite of
reference?
87?
Is he Market H. Plyer? Or is he Scott H. Cawthon? The world
Mhm.
will never know. So that's it for game discussion time, though.
Yeah. It's getting pretty late, so I gotta head to bed and
Yeah.
stuff. So
I will, however, post one last thing into the group chat.
it's gonna
This
be E.
this was the image I had popped up for the whole of game discussion time.
Why? Ray gets the first one to get on.
Let's see what he has to say. Let's see what
Just
he.
just just zoom in on like the last comment and then just end the video there.
Oh, it looks like he didn't have that much to say.
Oh.
Oh, is it really that?
Wait. Just zoom in on this comment. Hold on.